Okay, people, it is Lore Piece, and I hope you're ready because there is so freaking much to get into. I am way too excited, and I've been so hyped. One Piece is basically all I've been able to think about ever since I read chapter 1138, and I'm sure you're all in a very similar boat, and if that is the case, you and I should become friends. We should cement our friendship by you becoming subscribed to this channel, because I'd really appreciate your help in getting to 100,000 subscribers, but obsessing about One Piece is exactly what I do. But like I said, we have so much to get through today, so let's just get on with it. We are doing a deep dive into the Harley, into this great mural. I'm excited, you're excited, let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, the first thing that I want to mention is that I don't think this mural has been split up into exact thirds. And I have gone back and forth with this, but I don't think we can just take the mural and we can clearly draw a line and say, this is where the first world stops. This is where the second world begins, and this is where the third world begins. I don't think it's so easy to just demarcate the mural like that. I do think there are a few ways we can look at it. One way is that we could probably split this mural in half, actually, and everything on the right side of the tree, that might actually depict both the first and the second world, and then everything on the left side of the tree, that's the third world. That's the present / the future, the prophecy. Another way we can look at it is that on the right hand side, especially almost the first third, that probably could depict the first world, and then on the other hand, on the left hand side, the left third of the mural, that could probably depict the prophecy / the present, the future, and then elements of the second world. It seems like it could be imbued in both sides, and I have also seen people think that the entire mural is just the first and the second world, and the prophecy isn't actually part of the mural yet. I tend to disagree, but we can get into that later. Another way that I've looked at it is that this entire mural is supposed to be just metaphorical. Nothing is really a one-to-one depiction of how things played out in the past or how things will play out in the future. I mean, at the end of the day, this mural is someone's interpretation of the events, in which case you can't really expect everything to be 100% accurate. And so I think this mural, rather than being like a one-to-one, an exact portrayal of events, I think there are many possible interpretations that each symbol, each figure could have, and that Oda probably, most definitely, purposely imbued this mural with so many different, multiple meanings, because that's just the way that Oda writes. And I was really reminded of this thanks to chapter 1138, because now that we have been introduced to this idea of the three worlds, it's crazy to look back and think that, or realize that Oda named Kaido's attack Ragnarok, the destroyer of the three realms, which could also be translated as the destroyer of the three worlds. Now, back at Wano, it seemed very much like the realms were just referring to the land, sea, and sky, because that's very much tied to Kaido's introduction. Whereas now that we know about the Harley, now that we know about these three chapters, it seems like this attack might have even been talking about the past, the ancient past, and the future, especially because we know that Kaido wanted to be the Joy Boy, or wanted to be the next Joy Boy, and there's a high chance that he at least knows a little bit about the Joy Boy, knows a little bit about the Harley and about the prophecy, thanks to his relationship with Rox D. Xebec, but also with King, the Lunarian. It's very well possible that Kaido developed an attack called Ragnarok for that very purpose of wanting to be the next Joy Boy. It might have even been Rox D. Xebec's attack, and he might have just emulated Xebec's attack, much like how Shanks has taken on Roger's Divine Departure. And what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, both of those interpretations could be true. Both of them could be right. It could have been both the land, sea, and sky, as well as the three worlds, which is crazy, but I think you'll see that as I go on to unpack this mural, that's how I've interpreted many of these figures, many of these symbols, as if this mural could have two meanings or multiple meanings, and sometimes some of these interpretations may seem paradoxical. So with that in mind, let's begin. Actually, no, sorry. Before we begin, I also do have to mention that I am currently reading and interpreting the TCB translation of chapter 1138, and I do think it's important to point that out because I think this is a chapter, and overall, One Piece is a series where translations matter, sometimes where the exact wordings of things really do matter, but I do think this mural is a case where it is super important, and I'm sure that there may be differences once the Viz translation is released, so I'll probably do a stream once the official Viz translation is released so that I can look at the differences and see whether any of our interpretations change. So make sure to subscribe like I mentioned so that you don't miss out. But yes, for now I am looking at the TCB translations. Okay, now really we can begin. Alright, so let's look at the first world. Now we're told that the earth was burning in endless flames. And the way that I interpret this is that humanity was already stuck in a state of turmoil and war. In the ancient past, society was just rife with conflict. And I'm going to guess that that is why there's such heavy industrial imagery in this bottom right-hand corner. I think these factories, the production line, which also sort of looks like a tower or an elevator, people passing on what seems like bits of spark. For me, it seems like this is a society, this is a civilization that was stuck in a state of constant warfare, constant competition. And that's very much like our real world history. In our history's past, before the modern world, because of scarcity and for nation building purposes, most of our world's countries were involved in warfare. It was always about competition. Who can acquire what land? Who can build a bigger empire? And what that means is when you have this constant state of warfare, you have to be producing weapons. You have to be in constant armament production, and I think that's what's going on here. So when the Harley says that the earth was in endless flames, I think there are two meanings to this. The first is that flames means fire, as in there is a lot of conflict and war, you know, explosions, destruction, war. But two, I also think it's talking about the mother flame here. So I think the mother flame was already in existence in this ancient past, and humans somehow were able to tap into this energy source. Humans were harvesting it, were producing it, they were using it to power their warfare, they were using it to power their armament production. And I think that's what those humans are carrying and passing along the production line. I think that's actually supposed to show humans using and producing the eternal mother flame, or reproducing the mother flame. But obviously this isn't a sustainable way of life, or this way of life isn't for the benefit of everyone. Again, if you think back to our real world, if you think about the age of industrialization, even though industrialization was said to be for the whole of humanity, that it was necessary for human progress, we know that that had a serious toll on the environment. We know that things that we did as humans from the industrial era, that's when we really started to set in motion climate change. We also know that people had terrible living conditions back in the industrial era. People were living in terrible conditions, they had terrible labor rights, and I think that's what's happening here. Humanity, or at least those who weren't in control of society, they're not too happy about this constant state of warfare. They're not too happy about having to work day in and day out in these miserable factories. You know, they don't want to be forced to mine this very volatile and dangerous energy source. So what do? They call upon Nika. They call upon the savior who's going to liberate them from this slavery and is going to introduce them to the light. But this enrages the god of the land, the god of the earth. Now, how do we interpret this god of the land? Because for me, the immediate connection that I made and the idea that I like the most is that the earth has just been personified. This is Oda's way of attributing land or giving land a personified form. Similar to Gaia, the goddess in ancient Greek mythology, Gaia is the goddess of the earth. She is supposed to be the beginning of all creation. But the difference here is that whereas Gaia is actually a being, she is an actual goddess, an entity. The way that I see it, I don't actually think the Harley is talking about one god or one goddess, this earth god. Because at the end of the day, when you look at Luffy is said to be the sun god of this generation, of our present generation, but he's not actually a deity figure. He's not actually a god. He's still a human. Sure, he has powers, but he's not actually a superior being. Similar to the celestial dragons, they call themselves celestial and they liken themselves to deity figures, but we know that they're not. So I think that the Harley is doing a very similar thing with the earth and just sort of deifying it, even though the earth god doesn't actually exist as a god per se. I think they're just talking about the earth in a personified form. Or actually, more accurately, I think they're talking about the earth in an anthropomorphic form, because they say that the earth responded and the earth fought by unleashing the serpent of fire. Now here, the serpent Serpent of Fire. Now, surely we're all on the same page here that is a reference to the Red Line. And here is where the Jormungandr enters the chat. Now, for those of you who aren't already aware, I did also make an entire video discussing this very thing, so you can go check that out afterwards. But the Jormungandr is the world serpent from ancient Norse mythology. And the Jormungandr is said to hearken the beginning of the Ragnarok, and this is going to happen when it releases its tail from its mouth. So this is a world serpent that's currently biting its tail. And because of this Ouroboros imagery, I hope I said that right, the circular symbol that represents cycles and repetition, this idea of the rebirth, as well as the fact that the Jormungandr is said to encircle the whole of the Midgard, where humans are said to live. Again, myself, along with other people, have talked about the possibility of the Red Line having been influenced by this creature, the Jormungandr of Norse mythology. And now it really does feel like Oda has quite heavily leaned into this with the introduction of the Serpent of Fire. Especially the fact that this serpent is drawn with this pattern down the middle and then with X's alongside it. For me, that really looks like the Grand Line. It looks like that pattern strip is the Grand Line, and then the X's on its side could be different islands, or it even looks like what the reverse mountain looks like from a bird's eye view with an almost X. Now, whether this means that the Red Line will literally be a serpent, or at least the carcass of a real-life serpent, or again, whether this is purely metaphorical. Perhaps the Earth God, or just Earth, fought back by terraforming, and it defeated humanity by these massive geological formation that weakened humanity because it separated humanity into the four seas. And the more I think about this, the more I quite like the latter idea about all of these just being much more metaphorical. That we're just actually talking about the powers of the Earth, the powers of Mother Nature, if you will. Because initially when I first read this, I thought about Imu as being the god of the earth, and that there would have actually been a literal red snake. And now I'm not saying that I no longer think 100% that Imu as the god of earth and that the red snake never existed, but I also do really like this idea of Earth itself fighting back, especially given our real life circumstances of climate change. We're facing these environmental crises, and the more destruction, the more damage that we do to our environment, the more natural disasters we're experiencing. We know that Oda is very tuned in to real life world events, and he does actually look at things from a very political and cultural perspective. And so I really like this idea that as humans continue to damage the natural environment of the One Piece world, nature responded accordingly. And I think that brings a little bit more nuance into this battle. It's not simply clear cut as Nika's side's good, the other side bad. It's actually more like the Earth just got sick of both sides using this insane energy source. They abused it, they misused it, and the things they were doing with it, i.e. waging warfare and continuing that warfare, they just kept destroying the natural environment. And so nature responded, Earth fought back. And when you think about it from this perspective, there is a whole lot of biblical and other mythological influences here. The first one that I thought of was Prometheus. So Prometheus is the ancient Greek god of fire who actually went against the rest of the Olympian gods by gifting humans with fire, and this fire is said to have represented knowledge and is supposed to be the gift of civilization. There's also the story of Adam and Eve from the Bible. Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, which gave them, again, knowledge and gave them true consciousness. And the one who actually tricked Eve into eating this forbidden fruit was the serpent. But the illusion that's probably the strongest in this case is actually the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. So according to this biblical legend, all humans actually used to speak one language and used to be of one culture. This made it really easy for humans to communicate and to cooperate. And one day, the Babylonians decided to try and reach the heavens for themselves. They wanted to build a tower that would go so high into the heavens, which is really a metaphor of becoming like God. God, watching this, was angered by this attempt, and he disrupted the Babylonians by confusing them by introducing new languages so that they could no longer communicate and could no longer cooperate. This had the effect of dispersing the Babylonians. The tower never got built, and this is the biblical origin story of how languages exist, or how many different languages exist, why so many cultures exist, and this is also said to have what really sowed discord and conflict against different groups and against different different communities. And I think this story is so key here, because in both cases, whether it be the original power holders, the original authority who misused the eternal flame to sow war and to keep society in a state of constant warfare, or whether it be the slaves who created or called upon a god for themselves, both sides really misused the mother flame for their own purposes, and in their own ways tried to become more like God, tried to raise themselves above humanity. They reached too far. And it was in this phase of human civilization's unfettered ambitions that Earth fought back. And much like God dispersing humanity by creating different cultures, the Red Line was formed. This had the same effect of humanity becoming scattered, of dispersing, and this led to humanity's defeat. Because by separating the sea, the All Blue, into the four seas, and by creating the Grand Line, the Calm Belt, this means that humanity suddenly has to deal with trying to survive in this very unfamiliar terrain, these very unpredictable weather systems, things that don't make sense, the seasons don't really make sense. Humanity's too busy trying to survive that they don't really have the time to exploit the world's energy source. And this is when they're cast into darkness. Like the dark ages of our own real-world history after the fall of the Roman Empire, we lost a lot of the progress that we made during the Age of Antiquity. In One Piece, humanity also lost all of their great knowledge, all of their great technologies. Now, those were some of the most immediate ideas that came to mind, but as I was doing a little bit more research, another really interesting take, or another really interesting potential real-life inspiration for the Red Line and for this metaphorical serpent of fire is, or could be, Apep or Apophis. Now, Apep or Apophis is the deity of darkness, or the deity or the god of chaos according to ancient Egyptian mythology. So Apophis is said to be the mortal enemy of Ra, Ra being the sun god, the highest, the top of the Egyptian pantheon. And importantly, this god of chaos, this god of darkness, has often been represented via a giant snake or a giant serpent, very much like the serpent of hell, serpent of fire. And also in some interpretations or some Egyptian beliefs, it's actually believed that this state of chaos, this god of darkness, existed and predated the sun, predated Ra. And what that would actually mean is that that quite lines up very nicely with my interpretation that the Earth in One Piece history was offended by humanity's creation of its own sun god. Just as a fun fact, it is actually also after this ancient Egyptian deity that scientists named a meteor that was discovered. So we now have this meteor called Apophis, and this meteor was at one point believed to have been one of the most hazardous meteors that could affect Earth, which isn't the case anymore. But it is a pretty cool idea because, again, it sort of connects to that idea that there is this danger that can ruin humanity, that can defeat humanity like the Red Line did. Anyways, those are some of my thoughts and my interpretation of the first world, which I'm also calling the Age of Heavens. We have talked about this before. I'm going to guess that everything that happened before this event of the Red Line creating the first global destruction that we learned about in 1136 was most likely the Age of Heavens. You can go check that video out as well, but now we're going to move on to the second world. A breath stirred in the abyss. So I'm guessing what this means is that following the Age of Heavens, following the first global destruction, the world was plunged into darkness, plunged into the void, but then somehow, out of nowhere, there was a spark. Something set things into motion. And for me, based on the mural images, I want to say that the spark, the thing that stirred in the abyss, I'm gonna say that that was the arrival of the moon races. And the reason why I say that is because we actually have a very literal spark in the mural. There's a lightning strike that is coming out of the ship that looks an awful lot like the Ark Maxim, and close by to that lightning strike you can also see this great orb, which I'm sure that we're all interpreting to be the moon, but then above that moon, sort of hidden behind the texts of the first and the second world, you can see these two smaller orbs. And I think that these three orbs, the one big one and these two small ones, I think they're supposed to represent each of the winged races that we know came down from the moon: the Shandorians, the Skypians, and the Birkans. And I also know that back from the Ohara flashback, we have seen multiple orbs surrounding Earth in the Oharan library. And some people have theorized that that means that there are actually multiple moons that orbit the sun. And again, I'm not gonna say that that's 100% not true or that I don't believe in it necessarily, but again, for the purposes of this discussion and the purposes of this mural, I'm just going to metaphorically interpret that these three orbs are just metaphorical representations, symbolic representations of the three winged races that we were introduced to via Enel's cover story. Or, alternatively, because there are two smaller moons that are hidden, and then there's this one great big moon. Another way that I think this could be interpreted is that big moon, that big orb, is the Lunarian race, and the two smaller orbs, there actually are three. We just can't see the third one because we can't even really see the two very clearly. I think the three could be representative of the Birkans, the Shandorians, and the Skypians, but that third moon, third orb must just be out of view, might be a little hidden. Anyways, we know from the Enel cover story and from the Skypea flashback that after the winged races left the moon, the Shandorians actually settled in the Blue Sea, not in the Sky Islands, in the Blue Sea. And that the Shandorians actually were one of the great civilizations that existed prior to the Void Century. So taking that into consideration, the way that I'm interpreting this, what I think happened is that the moon races, or Shandorians in particular, they introduced humanity back to the ancient great technologies and the great powers that exist, the great powers that they had access to in the moon, and this brings new life, this breathes new life into humanity. Especially because if you remember back to the mural that Enel found on the moon, one of the symbols that were drawn, that were shown in that mural looks very, very much like Robin's Hana Hana Devil Fruit, the Hana Hana no Mi symbol. And knowing that the winged people created the automata, which is like an almost humanoid cyborg species, I think the moon people had an energy source that allowed them to create humanoids, and then they tried to replicate this back on Earth. And this is how the devil fruits emerged. Which is why the second chapter of the Harley reads, the god of the forest wove their magic, nurturing its devils. I'm sure most of us are on the same page that this is probably most likely talking about the devil fruits, because again, is there really an actual forest god? I'm inclined to say probably not. This probably is another metaphorical expression that just demonstrates the wonderful powers of the earth, the wonderful powers, the magical powers that gave birth to the devil fruits. And then this could also explain why there's a lightning strike that hits the tree. That lightning strike is supposed to be what stirs in the abyss. It's what wakes up humanity, jolts humanity back up, gives them the knowledge and the power to allow them to create the devil fruits. And then this of course explains the reawakening of the sun, because this is what allowed Joy Boy to gain the powers of the Nika devil fruit. And then this is what the Harley means by dreams of the half moon and the moon people. We already know from Vegapunk's hypothesis that devil fruits are supposed to be, or could be, the manifestations of what people think are possible for humanity's future, what people dream for humanity. And in that same way, the devil fruits are born from the dreams of the half moon people, aka the D clan, or the ancient kingdom citizens, whereas the full moon people, I think that's referring to the moon people, the winged races who came from the moon. And because the D clan, or the civilization, or the people of the ancient kingdom, because they worked with the winged people, because they actually collaborated with the Shandorians, they used Shandorians' technology and their knowledge to create these devil fruits and create new powers for themselves, give birth to rebirth to Nika's powers. This is the reason why the D clan are called the D clan, why they're known as the half moon, because they're not actually moon people themselves, they're not winged people, but they are affiliated with the winged people, they are affiliated with the new moon race. They joined forces with the moon people to create new powers. And I'm gonna guess that probably the large majority of the rest of the kingdoms, they probably weren't a fan of this. I mean, imagine if something like that happened in our real world, right? Like if aliens came down to Earth one day, I'm pretty sure most governments' responses would be to go on the offensive, or at least the defensive. I don't think they'll try to cooperate. I think it'll be attack, attack, attack. So I think a similar thing would have happened in the One Piece world. Most of the kingdoms would have regarded the Shandorians and the winged people as aliens and would have regarded them as dangerous, try to reject them, whereas the ancient kingdom embraced them. And so obviously this isn't going to sit well with the rest of the kingdoms. That's why the 20 kings revolt. That's why they wage war. And then we know the rest of the story. The 20 kingdoms or the 19 kingdoms, they eventually defeat Joy Boy, aka they slay the sun as per the text in the Harley. And then they go to Marijois, forming the world government, which the Harley explains as them deifying themselves because they become the Celestial Dragons. And then we already know from Vegapunk, from the Egghead Island arc, that once this happens, this Void Century War, this Great War, this is what caused the world's second great destruction. It caused the Great Flooding where most of the world sank. And that seems to be explained in the Harley as evoking the wrath of the sea god. And again, it seems like we have another personification of the sea. Whereas this time, the most obvious, the most straightforward interpretation or explanation of the sea god is probably that it's just a reference to Poseidon, whom we know is one of the ancient weapons, and that lines up pretty nicely with what we found out about Shirahoshi's powers in the Fishman Island arc. The fact that she can communicate and order Neptunians, the Sea Kings, cause them to run amok, which is what can cause so much chaos, and according to Queen Otohime, that it can cause the entire world to sink. Obviously, that lines up very nicely with what we found out via Vegapunk, that the ancient weapons, the use of the ancient weapons during the Void Century War was what caused the second world destruction, the Great Flood that caused the world to sink. But again, I think it's interesting to call her a sea god, right? Yeah, she has godlike powers, extreme powers, but I don't think we would have necessarily considered Poseidon, or I don't think we would have considered Shirahoshi as necessarily a god. But now that I look at this mural, I think it does actually introduce a really interesting twist, a new take on Joy Boy's promise to the Fishman, and the role that Luffy's gonna play in all of this. So previously, I think the general assumption was that Joy Boy intended to use the Noah to lift the Fishman, to raise the Fishman. He was going to transport the Fishman via the Noah to integrate them with society, to integrate them with the rest of humanity. But actually, when you think about it, this is pretty unnecessary, right? They're fishmen, and sure, obviously they're currently way deep underneath the sea, so it'd be difficult for them to swim all the way up to the earth's surface or to the sea surface. But at the end of the day, they can swim. They don't actually need this great arc. Whereas now that you take a look at this mural and knowing what we know about the Great Flood, I think what's more likely is that Joy Boy and Poseidon, they planned and they intended to flood the world. I think their plan was to sink the entire world to effectively create a new world where everyone would be equal. But obviously, because this would cause a lot of deaths, this could actually very well cause a genocide. I think they created the Noah, and their plan was to use this ship, this massive ark, to save humanity, or at least most of humanity, or at least sections of humanity. Allies of Joy Boy, for example, the Deke clan, the Innocent, anyone who wasn't part of the 19 kingdoms, essentially. And again, this is actually very much like the biblical story of Noah's Ark. In fact, in the mural, we actually have here 2 of different species, as well as just 1 of the winged people, which is pretty interesting. I think that's supposed to be, or could be, a representation that the plan was to save at least the Shandorians, who we know were allies of Joy Boy. But it seems like the fact that we have these 2 of different animal species and at least 2 humans, it seems like that's supposed to represent Joy Boy and Poseidon's plan to save some of the species and save some of the families from their great flooding. But of course, we know that Joy Boy didn't win during the Void Century War. Seems like maybe Poseidon used her powers, but this didn't necessarily have the intended effect. Or maybe used her powers too early, or maybe didn't actually use her powers in the way that they initially planned to. Yeah, it caused the great flooding, but maybe she did so just out of anger and not like a premeditated plan where they actually checked off all the necessary steps to make sure that they could save people first. But interestingly, alongside the Noah in this mural, we can see this shadow, this weird blob, this mass behind the Noah. And it was pointed out to me that this is most likely Zunisha. It's an odd shape, but you can sort of make out the elephant trunk and then the large body. And so I guess it would actually make sense for the 2, for Noah and for Zunisha, to be drawn side by side or to be drawn alongside each other. Because it seems like there's sort of the 2 solutions to save people during a great flood. So then that raises the question of who is that dark figure with the crown that seems to be steering Zunisha. Now, at my first look, my first guess was that this is Imu. The fact that the figure is shaded in darkness, it also has the three-pronged crown, which is how Imu has been depicted so far in the series. But now I actually think that Imu may just be represented by the dark winged figure that's coming down from the sky in this midsection, as well as the very similar looking figure on the left, very left of the mural. Especially because of the way that the serpent from the right side and that middle creature, the way that they're interacting. At first, I thought that they were actually blowing fire at each other as if they were almost attacking each other. Whereas now, I feel like you could actually interpret this to mean that these two figures are actually exchanging life forces, right? At the very least, the serpent is passing on its will to the winged dragon in the middle. And if this midsection is supposed to be most representative of the second world, it's as if Imu has almost gained the powers of the earth. And I guess that would make sense if Imu became deified in his own right or in her own right. And this is how Imu gained immortality. Imu gained the powers of the earth. In which case, then I think that crowned figure on top of Zunisha could actually be Queen Nefertari Lily. And what's happening here is that she's actually guiding all of Joy Boy's allies and the allies of the D clan into the future. The fact that she's steering the ship or that she's leading Zunisha, it's like it's a metaphor for Lily's role, the role that Lily played by disseminating the poneglyphs throughout the world, scattering Joy Boy's will so that the will of the D can live on into the future. And something really interesting in that case is that when you actually count the humans on this right side of the mural, the ones on the production line, there are 19 humans, 20 if you count this crowned figure. So this is what I mean about the fact that there seems to be no real clear beginning or end to this mural, or to where each of the worlds begin and end, because these 19 humans are on the production line, but they're also sort of on Zunisha's back. There's an interplay here, and it seems like these figures or these symbols can have two different meanings. On one hand, it's as if these humans depict the slaves of the first world. They depict the slaves who called upon Nika, but then from another light, you can also interpret them to mean the 19 kingdoms that opposed the D clan, that opposed Joy Boy during the Void Century. And then when you really look into it, I'm particularly curious about 3 of these human figures, because just 3 of them have halos on top of them. I mean, is that also supposed to be a representation of the 3 winged races? Or actually, you know what? Now that I look at it again, I actually think that this is showing how, or it's supposed to show how the harvesting, the manufacturing, the reproduction of the eternal flame, this is what allowed humans to become almost godlike. This is the process of how humans became deified, how they gained these additional powers. Almost like how the 19 kingdoms became the celestial dragons, hence the halo. That's pretty cool, and I think for now, that about wraps up my interpretation of the second world. So let's move on to the third world, and I do think this third chapter of the Harley tends to be the most straightforward, even the mural. So this is my quick, brief, quite loose interpretation of the third world, the third chapter of the Harley. Essentially, following the Void Century, the world has been thrown into chaos, the world has been plunged into darkness, but the world still has not forgotten the prophecy. The D clan, the will of the D, still lives on, and people remember that Nika will rise again. They know that he's going to appear laughing, dancing, guiding the world into the final war, into the new dawn, and this time the world will be whole again. And I guess that's the most interesting part, that last line of this third chapter, surely they will meet again. Because obviously this is a very big contrast to the last line of the first 2 chapters, which said that they would not meet again. Question is, who is they? Who are they? What does they refer to? And I think the most straightforward answer is that as humanity has been separated, whether that be via the red line or the fact that the world has sunk, meaning less connected lands, more islands far away from each other separated by sea, humanity has not been able to meet, have not been able to come together, has not been whole. Whereas Luffy as the reborn sun, if he can destroy the red line, if he can create the orb blue, if he can somehow even restore the water levels to what they should could be. And if he can bring about true peace to the world, then humanity can be whole again. They can be one again. They can meet again. And like I said earlier, some people have interpreted this left side of the mural, everything on the left side of the tree, to mean that this is actually the second world, that dark Nika figure is actually Joy Boy. I don't know. Like I said, I feel like in my heart of hearts that this is actually the third world and the prophecy is actually a part of the mural. I think this entire second half, everything after the tree, I feel like this is depicting the prophecy, especially because of all the figures that we have been expecting to be part of this final battle. People and figures that we think are going to make a reappearance in the final war. You know, we have this wolf creature, which very much seems like could be Yamato's awakened Zoan form. You know, we've got this single Lunarian, which could be representative of King the Lunarian as the sole survivor of his almost exterminated race. We've got Emmett, who's already played his part, Loki as perhaps one of the last remaining descendants of the ancient giant race, or maybe this giant figure is supposed to represent just all giants in general. We've got Minx, we've got the Tantata, we've got the Mermaid Princess, aka Shirahoshi, maybe a Neptunian, I'm guessing that's what that big fish is. That whale could be Laboon, might actually be Laboon carrying Crocus and Brook, or maybe that whale is actually supposed to represent King Neptune. But also because of that shadow figure on the very left hand side, right? Again, this shadowy figure looks very much like the one that's in the middle, coming down from the sky. And to me that feels like it's a representation of how Imu has survived from the second world into the third world. Imu has been present since the Void Century, which is something that we've known already. Especially because this shadowy figure on the left is holding up the sun, almost like he's going to swallow the sun. And to me that feels very much like how the Mother Flame is almost in Imu and the world government's control via York. It seems like this is representing Imu holding the Mother Flame in his grasp. And then on his side we've got 5 figures, and to me that seems like that's the 5 Elder Stars. That's the Gorosei. They're all wearing these white weird costumes, and that seems very much like the weird bubble outfits, the space outfits that the Celestial Dragons wear. Could also be the God's Knights, but the fact that there's 5 of them, to me that seems like it's the Gorosei. But the ones that raise the biggest questions for me, the ones that I'm unsure of, are actually the figures in the boats that are behind the giant, the one that's immediately left to the tree. Is that supposed to be the symbol of Arabasta, or is that supposed to be the Kozuki crest? Maybe it could be Arabasta, seeing as the one below them, the ship below them, already seems to depict a ninja and a samurai, and so that could very much represent Wano. But that symbol of the big circle with the smaller one surrounding it, that also seems very much like the Kozuki crest. Or how about these ships on the bottom of the left hand side? So there are 4 ships here, and I think these 4 ships, they're the hardest to decipher. The one with the long spear and what seems to be a scarf, for me that sort of looks like Katakuri. Someone pointed out to me that the figure in front of him, that could be Mihawk because it's a long sword, and you know, it sort of looks like that sword could be Yoru, and you know what, why not? But in that case, if that's Mihawk, I'm gonna say that the 2 figures beneath Mihawk, that's Buggy and Crocodile following Mihawk, which is pretty funny. That's a half joke. But I really have no idea for the person with the curly hair behind these 2 figures. But you know what? Okay, call me crazy. But if that's supposed to be Mihawk, and then if we say that's Buggy and Crocodile, we can say that that figure with the curly hair, that's actually Mr. 3. The curly hair is actually the number 3, and Mr. 3 is following Buggy. That's pretty hilarious. Again, half a joke. I guess the more easier answer could just be that these figures, the ones that aren't so easy to decipher, they could just be members of the Grand Fleet, or they could even be figures that we haven't actually met yet. At the end of the day, Mihawk said a while ago that Luffy's greatest power is his ability to make friends with anyone. So it's possible that between now and the final war, Luffy's going to amass even more friends, he's going to amass even more followers, and they're all going to be involved in the final war. And in that case, the other symbol that I'm really curious about is the rain that's falling on just a very small segment of the left-hand side. Initially, I thought that that might be the rain god, seeing as the rain god is the only one that hasn't explicitly been mentioned out of the 4 Shandor Saurian gods that we were introduced to back in the Skypiea arc. But then I had another idea, and I have to say I like this idea more. I think the rain is supposed to be a symbolic representation of a cleansing. It's like a great wash. Because Luffy is going to bring about a fresh new world, I think that like the rain, Luffy is going to clean the world of all the corruption, all the dirtiness, all its old wrong ways, and he's going to bring about a new fresh world. And then in that case, the only thing that I have not mentioned yet, where is Blackbeard in all of this? So I had to think about this a lot. I had to think, where does Blackbeard fit in? And I know that a simple representation, a simple answer could be that the shadowy figures of Blackbeard, but the more I thought about it, the interpretation that I came away with is that, well, at the end of the day, Blackbeard is a lot more intricately tied to the story than has been revealed, right? But we know that Blackbeard is this core part of the story, we just haven't quite figured out how it all fits in yet. And rereading the Harley, rereading these 3 chapters, I realized that something that has been a constant throughout these 3 chapters has been this idea of the void, has been this idea of darkness. And obviously that's very representative of Blackbeard. This is where Blackbeard lives and breathes. This is where he thrives. Blackbeard very intentionally sought out the Yami Yami no Mi because he wanted to embody the darkness. He wanted to embody the void. And I think that's because he understands the true power, the true ability. The true power throughout history has been darkness. If he controls the void, if he can control the darkness, he can control the world. I think that's something Blackbeard understands, and I think that's how he might tie into all of this. Anyways, those are my interpretations for now. I'm sure I will come up with new ideas as I keep rereading and rereading and rereading this chapter and keep looking at this mural again and again and again. I'm sure you guys will too, so make sure to stay tuned. Like I said, we will do another discussion once the official chapter drops. Also, I'm sure that you have had very different interpretations to the ones I've had, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this mural and this history of the One Piece world. So please do leave a comment below. If you haven't already, again, please do subscribe. I am trying to get to 100,000 subscribers this year, and I would love your help. But as always, thank you so much for listening to another one of my ramblings. I hope today's hasn't been too crazy. I hope it made some sense. If you'd also like to support the channel further, you can also become a Patreon or channel member. This is Joy Girl, and I'll see you again very, very soon.